The night was dark, icy, and so was John Otway's heart. By the light of a dim lamp he was writing a letter to his wife, who had died of illness. The silence of his musings was broken by the wind whistling outside the windows. His memory switches to his work, a drilling rig lost in the icy wilderness of Alaska. John holds a rifle. His job is to shoot wolves. Here work outcasts of society, criminals, fugitives, people with a difficult past, who could not fit into this world. Fights often break out between them. Tired of everything, he goes out on the street and contemplates suicide. His finger on the trigger trembles, but just when it seems there is no turning back, a wolf howl comes from far away. Morning comes, the shift ends, and the workers fill the cabin of a small passenger plane. John sits at the window with a letter in his hand. But a man sitting next to him prevents him from concentrating. John is annoyed but does not engage in conversation, trying to sleep. However, the peace is disturbed by sudden turbulence. After a minute, the plane suddenly loses altitude. The air around them shrinks, the cabin fills with screams. Snow-covered forests flicker in the porthole. He tenses, but realizes they are doomed. When he wakes up, he finds himself in the snow. Gathering his strength, he gets up and notices smoke from the wreckage of the plane on the horizon. His first thought is to save the others. Among the wreckage he finds the first survivors. Among them, he also finds people dying. Speaking to him quietly, almost without emotion, he helps him face the end courageously. The others watch him in silence, feeling horror but also admiration. John has more experience than the others, so he takes charge. He orders the gathering of wood for a fire, knowing that death by cold is much closer than death by starvation. Among the trash he finds a lighter. Gradually, the others begin to trust him. Here, among the vast snow, a harsh struggle for survival awaits them, in which fear will be their worst enemy. As darkness falls, the camp falls into an ominous silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire. John and the other survivors scavenge the remains of the plane, pulling out anything they can use for fuel and shelter. Suddenly, John notices movement near the flaming wreckage. With hope, John rushes towards it, but halfway there he stops. The reason for the movement becomes clear: it's a wolf. The predator growls, tearing chunks of flesh from the girl's body. The wolf, sensing a threat, lunges at John. But the other survivors manage to come to the rescue and drive the predator away. John, breathing heavily, realizes that the wolves will return after smelling the shelter. Cautiously, they drag the bodies of the dead away from the camp. Diaz, one of the workers, brazenly searches the pockets of the dead, removing watches, rummaging through purses. John, unable to stand it, hits him with his fist. The conflict subsides, but the tension between them remains. At night, they see Wolf's eyes in the darkness. The men freeze with fear, but the wolves do not rush to attack. The predators slowly retreat. They realize they must be on guard, and they supply sentries. At night, the sentinel moves farther away from the camp to relieve himself. This was a mistake. In the morning, they find the partially rotted remains of the sentinel. John suggests they head into the woods because it is very dangerous to stay here. They gather everything they can use: the wallets of the dead, fuel for the fire, some food. John takes his letter, which miraculously survived, as well as a broken rifle and some ammunition. A strong wind prevents them from walking, and visibility is almost zero. One of the travelers begins to fall behind. Screams of terror pierce the blizzard as a wolf pounces on him. The men try to save him, but to no avail. The beasts kill the man. They do not manage to reach the shelter before darkness falls. The wolves get closer and closer, sensing the weakness of the group. The men run from the last strength, get to the lowland, where they finally make a fire. The predators surround them, but do not attack, only howl loudly, as if playing with their prey. Taking advantage of the brief respite, John offered to make weapons. He cut twigs, sharpened them, and burned the ends on a fire to increase their strength. Then he put shotgun shells on the points, explaining that they could explode on impact and stun predators. Diaz, standing off to the side, began to taunt them. Diaz's acrimony quickly escalated into an argument. Diaz grabbed a knife to prove his strength with a cold weapon. John, through his experience and cold stamina, disarmed him. Suddenly, a growl sounded out of the darkness. A huge wolf, the leader of the pack, approached the campfire itself, signaling his presence. His eyes met John's. They stared at each other for several long seconds before the predator disappeared into the woods. Diaz calmed down and apologized. But suddenly a wolf leapt out of the darkness and pounced on him. While Diaz fought for his life, the others struck the beast with improvised weapons. In the end, Diaz killed the predator with a knife. The men cooked the meat of the slain wolf, but even that was no consolation. The constant howling outside added to the atmosphere. In a rage, Diaz cut off the head of the killed animal and threw it into the darkness. However, this only increased the hostility of the pack. After that, they gathered torches and moved into the forest. On the way, one of them, Burke, fell ill, and the group made a halt. Around the campfire, the men began to share memories. In the morning, they discovered that Burke had died of hypoxia. Sighing heavily, they continued on their way. Soon they were stopped by a chasm. From behind them they heard the howling of a pack, which came closer and closer. John proposed a risky plan. One of them had to jump to a tree on the other side and secure the rope. Hendrik volunteered to jump and was successful. As everyone began the crossing, trouble caught up with the last man. His shoe caught on the rope and it broke. The man fell, hitting the branches. The wolves, who had been waiting for this moment, immediately dragged his body away. The snowy forest and the relentless cold chilled the men to the bone. Diaz limped on, leaving deep footprints in the loose snow, until he came to the river. An abandoned boat lay on the bank, half broken, like their hopes of rescue. Diaz stopped, leaning against a tree, and declared that he would stay here. There was no anger or reproach in his voice, only humility. John said nothing, but looked at his companion understandingly. He knew it was pointless to argue. John put his hand on Diaz's shoulder, nodded briefly, and went on with Pete, leaving his friend to enjoy his last moments by the river. But no sooner had they traveled far than a howl sounded from behind them. The wolves had caught up with them. John and Pete ran along the bank, but Pete stumbled and fell into the icy water. John rushed after him, but at one of the rapids Pete caught his foot on two rocks. John tried to pull him out, pulling as hard as he could, but the water was merciless. Pete died in his arms. Yonk, finally exhausted, walked through the woods, remembering those who had walked with him. He opened his backpack, pulled out the wallets of the dead and looked at the pictures of their families. While he was remembering them, they were surrounded by wolves. The pack leader, a massive alpha male, was the last to appear. John remembered his wife and gathered all his strength. He taped empty liquor bottles to his hand and smashed them against a rock, turning them into improvised weapons. In his other hand he held a knife. The wolf lunged at him, and the screen went dark, leaving the final fight to the viewer. That was the end of the movie. If you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe and give the channel a like. See you soon.